Patrick, when I heard you speak at the MSA annual conference, you made a comment that stuck with me since. You had said, culture isn't part of the strategy, it is the strategy. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I actually coined that phrase, but it was really Bill Taylor, and he was the founder of Fast Company magazine. And he is any of the things that you've read about him. I've had the good fortune to be able to know Bill over the years through Virginia Council of CEOs and other things like that. And when he and I were first talking about this over at a lunch, and he was talking about your culture is your strategy. It is exactly what that is. And that is whatever the actions are around your office, the way that people interface with one another, the values that you believe in, regardless of what you think the company's strategy is, that culture and how people live within your ecosystem, that's how they're going to deliver the product. That's how they're going to be treating the customers. That's how they treat the vendors. And that culture, if it's a culture of kindness, or if it's a culture of service, or if it's a culture of industriousness, that's what the market is ultimately going to see, because it's going to be reflecting in all of your teammates and your people. So when you look at what your culture is, that is, in fact, the strategy. It's not what's written on the wall or written on a piece of paper. It's the way that people are actually behaving. And to the degree that you are cultivating a culture that has an impact on the wider world, that's ultimately how you win, is picking that culture. That is it. If you, Brad, had a culture that was driven around marketing and all of your team members were focused in on marketing, that's your strategy to the world.
So that sounds to me like it's a good differentiator among staffing firms. In an industry that is rather commoditized, where companies can't find a true differentiator, can't find out what makes them unique in terms of what they do any different than their local competitor, it sounds like leaning into culture is a good differentiator.
It is. And especially if you take something like innovation, or, creatively solving a problem. If your team is really super creative about coming up with, let's pick a problem. You have a no-show, right? Somebody is supposed to show up to a client and they don't do it. But your team is really innovative about how they're able to find those replacements and then get them out to the field. Then that culture of innovation becomes, in effect, what your strategy is going to be. If it is about supporting your temporary workers, then that level of support becomes your competitive advantage, because they're the ones that are going to stick with you. They're not just going to jump from staffing company to staffing company to staffing company. They're going to stay very close because they know that there is a culture of caring that's within the organization as well. Those are definitely differentiators. When we go to the bottom line and we just say, yeah, it's going to be bill rate, pay rate, what's the differential? And, I can beat my customers on that particular thing. We are stepping over dollars to pick up dimes. And really what the dollars are going to end up being is that long-term differentiator that people say, your team always comes through for us. And it's not just about what your bill rate is.
How do we develop that culture? Is that leadership down, or does that sort of happen organically?
It's actually a little bit of both, right? The first one is identifying some of those hallmarks, some of those pillars of the culture. And that's usually for the founder or for the CEO of saying, what are the things that you really believe in? Because if there's a disconnect between the leadership of the organization and then ultimately the people who are delivering the product out there, then the machinery is going to end up being broken. So the part of it is saying, okay, these are the fundamental things that I believe in, all right, as a founder or as a CEO or as an executive committee. This is the way that we want to present to the world. But the second thing is once that those pillars are established, it's making sure that the team members can contribute to it. And that is the activities, the marketing activities. It could be the sales activities. It could be the development activities, human resource activities, all of those other things. When they are built by the individuals within the organization and it's built on those pillars, that's what really strengthens it. So it's both leadership and an organic development, and making sure that if there's anything that's anathema to those fundamentals, is that we're kind of cutting those and, snipping those away.
Yeah. Can we train then to fit into the culture? Should we be hiring based on culture more than skills?
It's the age old question, right? Which is, how do I find these individuals?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do believe that there are cultural fits for people and they're going in. So for example, even in our firm, our guys, in order to get hired into our firm, you are going to be going through a process. And long before they get to me, they are already being vetted out by the team in the back. And they're going through multiple interviews, and they're going through skill set interviews, and they're going through attitudinal interviews. And then they'll come in and they'll say that this person really fits in. They actually use the words. This person actually fits in with the culture. This person has our work ethic. This person we feel like we can go to the foxhole with, and they're going to be supporting us, or they're really creative. And they add this element to our intellectual DNA. And then finally it gets bubbled up. So the answer is yes. There's baseline skills that everybody has to have. And there's also going to be to it an element of, does this person come in and do they add to the collective power of that team?
Let's not sugarcoat it. Selling staffing is brutal right now. Only 2% of US jobs are temporary, and with 25,000 staffing firms chasing that tiny slice of business, it's harder than ever to stand out. But what if you could create demand? What if you could help clients see staffing as a strategic advantage? Join Haley Marketing on April 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern for a free webinar. Can you really create demand for staffing services? Led by Haley Marketing co-CEO David Cerns and a powerhouse panel of Dan Morin, Tom Erb, and Mark Winter, this session will unpack what works and what doesn't when it comes to generating demand in a frozen market. And don't forget to submit your biggest sales and marketing challenges when you register. We'll tackle them live on Lunch with Haley. You register now at lunchwithhaley.com. Again, that's lunchwithhaley.com. All right, let's get back to the show. Internally, I think this makes a ton of sense for me. Walk us through how this correlates to individuals we're putting on temporary assignment. Is culture still as important of a fit when you're putting a temp on an assignment for 12 weeks? Or are you just sort of hoping they can get the job done?
It's, that's really the balance within our organization.
Right.
This also goes, that also goes to how well do you actually know your client, right? Are you really embedded with your client? Is your team when they're going out and they're interfacing with the client, did they understand what that culture is? Because now you're really talking about a differentiator. If you are providing temps into an organization and you understand their culture and you understand how they are behaving and how they're acting, this person is going to throw off a lot less problems, right? And as a result of that, the product that you're putting forth, this individual into that ecosystem, they typically tend to have greater longevity. Even if it's only 12 weeks or so, it has less bumps. It has less pushback. It has less kickback, so to speak. And so this is the marriage between really understanding your client and being able to deliver a team member into their ecosystem that is also harmonious. And when a company can do that more often than not, it's deepening the relationship and they're strengthening that client customer relationship.
I had Tom Erb on a while ago, and he had mentioned that the majority of the industry, he's a good friend of Haley Marketing, a good friend of the show. He had mentioned most of the industry is seen as a necessary evil. And really the goal is to become a trusted advisor. So he had this A to E sort of hierarchy of going from a necessary evil to a trusted advisor. And I think the staffing firms who can understand who their clients are, the type of culture they have, they become the trusted advisors. If they're sending the right candidates that are not just going to get the job done, but are also right fit culturally, that's how you become a trusted advisor. You're a necessary evil if you're just sending somebody who can do marketing to fill a role, right? So to say, in terms of my language, that's a necessary evil. It takes it a step further when you become a trusted advisor, though, and you're actually fitting not only based on skill set, but also cultural fit.
Yeah, because they're not having to look over their shoulder. They always know that you're going to deliver on your promise. And they always know that the person that you're sending over, the staffing company, the person that you're sending over is not only going to work in their environment, but it's going to work to their standards. So that is going to care enough about what it is that they're doing, or is going to kind of slot in with the mores of that particular organization. And that's it definitely becomes a competitive advantage, because now every time they pick up the telephone and say, we need 3 more, or we need one of these, or we need, a group of people to be able to do this particular project, there's a trust factor that goes along with that. And if you think about it, it's kind of like driving along with somebody in a car, right? And when the person knows where they're going, the passenger could like play with the radio, look out the window, take a nap, or whatever else it is.
Yeah.
But when you feel as if the driver doesn't know where they're going, then the passenger jumps in and starts saying, "Oh, turn left here, turn right here." Sorry, I'm not trying to give you an indicator on my own answer there, but so the greater we know where we're going with those fits going into our client corporations, they allow us to drive. We become that trusted advisor, and we can take them ultimately where they need to go without them having to manage us or our organization.
Hey, it's Brad taking a short break to tell you about an offer exclusive to listeners of Take the Stage. 30 minutes of strategic marketing consultation with me, completely free. Hey, whether you're looking to drive more sales or more job applications, I want to help. Visit bit.ly/stage offer. Pick a time that works best for you. That's it. Again, whether you want to drive more applications or more job orders, I want to help. That's bit.ly/stage offer. All right, let's get back to the show.
Would you say that culture is the number one identifier in terms of the Goliaths in the industry compared to the small to mid-sized staffing firms in the industry?
I don't know if I would kind of cut it off right there. Because I think I think there's really big organizations with great cultures. I used to work for General Electric, and in the time that I used to work for GE, that culture was really imbued. It was a culture of winning. It was a culture of being, of creative problem solving and being fairly smart. And there's also fairly small, nimble companies with really tightly ingrained cultures and an esprit de corps that goes forward. So I wouldn't necessarily assign it to the big organizations. I wouldn't necessarily assign it even to the small ones. I think what it ends up coming down to is the group of people with whom you've entrusted the company, and how important it is to you as a leader of a staffing company, and saying, these are the things that are important to us, and this is how we're going to differentiate ourselves internally, so it manifests itself externally.
Understood. Another really strong point that you made during your talk at MSA is that the most disruptive companies have a culture of accountability, responsibility, and learning. Unpack that for us.
Sure. If you take a look at those cultures, when you and let's do it in reverse, right? When you have a culture of learning, and there is an idea that everybody contributes. There was an article written in Harvard Business Review a few years ago, which was who's bringing you your best ideas. And you're looking within the organization saying, who is bringing the ideas, the competitive ideas to the company? Who's allowing us to raise our game? Who's looking outside of the industry for ideas that we can bring from other industries, bring it into ours, and it will be a totally new idea? Who's reading? Who is studying the market? That is a culture of learning. And if you put a high premium on that, your company is going to be flooded with new ideas, new competitive ideas that the industry hasn't seen. And so you're not becoming an also-ran, you're becoming a thought leader. Now, the idea itself might not necessarily be new, but it will be new to the industry. And when it's not just coming from the White Tower, when it's not just coming from the CEO's office, but it's coming from all of the team members who are delivering on this, and you create an expectation, Brad, of we're expecting you to share these ideas. We're expecting you to bring your ideas. We want you to. That culture of learning creates an endless competitive advantage, or at least opportunities for competitive advantage. Then you have that culture of responsibility. And the culture of responsibility says that we as individuals are responsible for delivering on a result. We have a responsibility for delivering for the customer. We have a responsibility for elevating the tide in this boat, this economic boat in which we're all traveling. And a lot of times organizations kind of fail in that responsibility. And that's because they're just saying, they start pointing to other people because they have also not built an organization that you're allowed to fail. You're allowed to be able to make a mistake. Right. So the culture of responsibility says you own it and we're trusting you. We believe in you to do it. The last one is a culture of accountability, which says, hey, you brought us the idea. You have the responsibility for being able to implement it, and we'll hold you accountable for being able to get it done. But interestingly enough, where most companies fall short is that the accountability is only going one way. And the accountability goes from the C-suite down, as opposed to the people who are delivering the goods, delivering the product, looking up at the CEO and saying, I'm going to hold you accountable for all the things that are important for the company as well. If you want, I'll give you a quick example of this.
Please.
In one of my previous companies, we had a pretty big apartment company, and we had one of our basic rules where all telephone calls were to be returned the same day, right? And the way that it was written was, it's courteous to return all telephone calls the same day, right? And I had gotten a message from one of our property maintenance guys, and he had left it on my voicemail. I was a senior officer of the company, and he had called me to ask me a question. I just ran out of time that day, and I didn't get back to him until noon the next day. And I picked up the phone and I talked to him, and he goes, Mr. Morin, he goes, I really appreciate you calling me back. He goes, courtesy dictates that we do return all telephone calls the same day. And I did call you yesterday. I was kind of hoping for an answer, right? I'm like, now you have one of those two responses, right? The first response is, yeah, I was busy, whatever. But he held me out to it. And I ended up, I believe I sent him out a C note. I think I sent him out $100 bill and a note that said, thank you for calling me out on that. Thank you for holding me accountable. So the accountability goes both ways, up and down.
I wonder how many leaders would have done the same. I wonder how many leaders, if pressed in the same situation, would have said, you know what, you're right. I was wrong in this situation, and done what you did.
You know, I appreciate that. I'd love to believe that many more of them out there did. I think that there's two really superpowers in the world. Like, you know how you're always asked if you had a superpower, what would it be? And everybody's like, invisibility, flight.
I want to fly.
Right. Yeah. So if I really had a superpower, it would actually be, I'd love to understand every language the time that I heard it. So I had total clarity of communication. That would be my primary one. But the reality, there's two superpowers that we don't see, but I think are superpowers is, the first one is humility. And that is the ability to realize, as Emerson said, every person is in some way my superior, and in that I learn from them. And realizing that the guy who's turning wrenches on a property is my superior in that particular aspect, and I should listen to him. And he was calling me for a reason that was important, and it ended up being important. And so the humility to say, you know more about the subject than I do, that's superpower number one. Superpower number two is the ability to say you're sorry. The ability, and it's not just, when you're kids, I'm sorry I punched you in the face.
Yeah.
But it is, I'm sorry. This is how I'm sure it probably impacted you. And this is how I'm going to fix it going forward. And so I would love to believe that leaders out there have the superpower of humility and the superpower of being able to say they're sorry. And ultimately that creates that culture of accountability, that culture of responsibility, and that culture of learning, because everybody knows that you're doing it.
A well said and a well felt I'm sorry goes an incredibly long way. When you know you messed up, or somebody else knows they messed up, and you are on the receiving end of that, it's a complete game changer. And I think it's easy to say in an email, almost gloss over it and just continue going back on with business, right? Or you skip the I'm sorry part, or the I apologize for this part, especially if you're over a Zoom call or you're on email and you're not face to face with somebody. But when hand up, I did something wrong here, I was not in the right, a well said and a well articulated I'm sorry goes a long way. I'm in the camp where a handwritten note also goes a super long way for someone like me. I think why is it's very easy now to send an email, send a text message, whatever it might be, an in-mail. But if someone stops to take the time, and we're kind of going on a tangent here, but if someone stops to take the time and write me a handwritten note,
It's your show, Brad. You can go anywhere you want to go.
Good point. I have the microphone. You listen to what I have to say. When somebody takes the time to write a handwritten note and they hit you with that sort of, they didn't have to do that for me. It changes things. And I think if we could have the humility, the power to be empathetic, to say I'm sorry, to be human, that's where I think the best staffing and recruiting firms come into play, right? When we put that human element back into the industry that we're a part of, yes, I'll be the first to admit there's technology that is going to exponentially increase the way that we do our jobs. I was just looking at some great AI tools today at time of recording that are going to exponentially change the recruiting landscape, the sourcing landscape. But to pick up the phone and be human and to have a candidate know that you are in their corner, or to have a client know that you are in their corner, that to me is differentiation through and through.
Yeah. And remember, we create our companies to effectively be the a competitive advantage for our clients. If we start thinking through that, if you use my firm, then the people that I send you are going to give you a competitive advantage out there in the marketplace. If your clients actually understand that, and then there's a faux pas, whatever there was, there's some kind of mistake, there's some kind of faux pas, and you say, I am sorry that this particular group or this particular individual didn't work out, or we didn't deliver on this particular thing. And then you add that other part to it, which is this must have screwed up your line, or this must have screwed up this particular delivery for you. This must have made you less competitive. And that is not our intention. That right there is completely different from anything else they've heard. Usually they're like, oh, I'm sorry, our guys didn't show up. Okay. But it's not. We understand that, I'm sorry that our guys didn't show up. It obviously puts you at a competitive disadvantage on that third shift the other night. And that is not our intention. Our intention is to be really reliable. Here's what we're going to be doing in the future to fix that. Yeah. And so now let's take it back to what you had said before. Even that apology, even that level of human connection, you are now holding yourself accountable. You are holding yourself responsible, right? And you are telling the client, we have learned from this interaction. Now you got a culture of accountability, culture of responsibility, culture of learning, and that culture is in fact your strategy.
Do you want to land more clients and close more deals in 2025? Haley Marketing is offering big savings to help staffing firms like yours grow. Get $1,000 off targeted marketing campaigns, free tools to track your hottest leads, and no setup fees on services that help your company get found online. Plus, we'll even help you stay in touch with prospects for free. But you need to act fast. These deals end June 30th. You visit bit.ly/Bialy offer to find out more information. Again, that's bit.ly/Bialy offer for more information. All right, let's get back to the show. I've said on this show before, and I've said it on our other show, Insights, before, I think the staffing industry is the number one industry where we're constantly apologizing and fighting an uphill battle because of other people in the industry. We have to almost apologize for the way that other recruiters or other sales teams or other staffing firms treated our clients. So we can't just come in and say, hey, here's how we do our line of business. Here's what we do, and here's how we do it differently. That I'm sorry is coming because of something that somebody else did. And we have this sort of black eye negative connotation as an industry because of what, again, somebody else did. And it's interesting, you might go out tonight and have a steak that's completely awful, absolutely terrible. It doesn't mean that next week you're not going to try a steak again and go somewhere else. But one bad experience with one staffing firm can completely turn off a company or a candidate to this entire industry forever. And I think it's the only industry that's like that.
Yeah, I would love for you to believe that. Go ahead.
What other industry is the same?
But even our industry. So we're in the M&A industry, right? We sell people's companies, and our industry is full of charlatans, right? And so everybody looks at the investment bankers, and all they do is they see on television this meme or this caricature of investment bankers, not realizing that there are some of us out here who really go to the mat for our clients, right? Who really care about what happens to the company post-transaction. And so from time to time, you feel as almost you have to apologize on behalf of the industry as a whole, right? Right. I'm really sorry. I'm into it. Staffing in particular, though, is because the frequency of some of the faux pas actually is out there. We have to be able, not necessarily be apologists for the industry as a whole, but that's that differentiation, which just says, hey, look, you might have experienced these these things over here in our industry as a whole. Let me tell you what we've done to learn from what our industry has been doing, and how we learned from that, how we fixed it, and how we held ourselves accountable. Again, you're going back to those three things that you and I had just talked about, and you're doing it in such a way that it tells them, yeah, we realize that there are some bad actors out there, and this is what we did to not be that thing. Again, a differentiator both on the front end of the engagement and through the engagement.
I like that framework. Before we get you out of here, I want to talk about one more slide and one more talking point that you had at MSA that I gravitated towards. You had talked about how when you're drafting a strategic rationale, we need to think about the business that we own, the business we can compete for, and the business that we reach for.
Yes.
I have found lately on the calls that I've been a part of and the clients that I've been working with, we're reaching for a lot more business lately. How do we sort of bring in this? It was almost the Simon Sinek golden circle, as you alluded to and how you drew it up. Talk to us a little bit about and unpack for us how you can own certain business, compete for business, and then ultimately reach for other business.
Yeah, and this is if you think about the old conglomerates back in the 60s and the 70s, and then to some degree early in the 80s. These are these organizations, these big companies that would make, I'll take General Electric, for example. They made toasters and they made television and they made airplanes and they made medical devices, right? And then they had 400, 500 different companies that were all mixed in there. And then all those numbers kind of went up there. We are now in an age of specialization. We are now in an age of being experts in a body of knowledge or in something. So what that means is that when we're creating our strategies going forward, we have to ask ourselves, what part of the market do we absolutely want to own? What do we want to know most about? What do we want people in the market to perceive us as experts in? Because then we get the telephone call. We don't call our doctor and ask him to do heart surgery for a general practitioner. We call a cardiologist, right? Or a cardiothoracic surgeon. We'll go to a brain surgeon. We, even with our cars, if some of us drive a Mercedes, we're trying to find somebody who works on Mercedes and not necessarily on Ford or works on just American cars. So what I recommend for most of these staffing companies is, what do you want to own? That's your core. And you make sure that you suck the oxygen out of the room in that area where you're going to own it. You're going to know the players in the space. You're going to know the workers who are in the space. You're going to know everything there is about it. Then as we expand our businesses, we can go out a little bit further, and we can actually start to compete in those environments. And we say, all right, this one is tangential to the business that I own, and I want to compete against this. So when we own a space, we should be winning on a fairly consistent basis because everybody knows that we're really good at it. Okay. When we compete on something, it might be 50-50. All right. We have other competitors in that particular space. They might know it. They might own that space, but we're trying to enter it. So we're not going to win it all the time. We just need to win at 50-50 or, maybe a little bit more. But then there's this reach part, which says this is something that's going to really expand our company. And we're not fully formed experts on it, but we know that we want to go in that direction in the future. And maybe we win 1 out of 10 out of those, but the 1 out of 10 out of those starts to give us experience so we can start competing, and then we can eventually own that space. The problem, Brad, that I see in most companies is that they are reaching for everything. They are grabbing, we could do this, we could do that, we could do the other thing. And then what they do is they end up sacrificing margin, or they sacrifice delivery, or they sacrifice some other core part of their culture in order to reach for everything. And sadly, that's what starts to spiral down. It starts to break it down. They start to see their margins erode. They start to see their customer service erode. They start to see their customers leaving or starting to dial down the total amount of volume that they're getting from them. And it's because they're out there reaching for everything instead of understanding and owning their.
What if there is no business in their core? What if they have to compete or have to reach? Right now, it's very difficult to close job orders, right? That's all I'm hearing on every single call that I'm a part of.
Yeah.
So I feel like inherently, you then have to reach, right? You have to try to find, well, otherwise the business is going to go out of business, maybe, right? Presumably so. If there really is no local business in the space that you own, what do you propose staffing firms do?
Yeah, so there's that whole thing. This is something that we can actually learn from Silicon Valley, right? Because Silicon Valley has the term pivot. We pivoted this, right? We had this original awe-inspiring idea, but it really wasn't working out. So we pivoted and we became this thing over here. And in almost every successful story that you hear out there, there is going to be some degree of pivot. And it, when I was working at GE, Jack Welch used to have this phrase that he would pump throughout the company, and he would say, operate in the world that it is, not in the world as you think it is. Okay, meaning operate within reality. And I think the first thing to be able to look at is what is and what is not. What actually is not. What do you hope for it to be? And then as you're starting to say, okay, the area that we own is shrinking and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. AI, other things like that are contributing to those types of things. You say, what is the tangent? What is the piece that comes off or is the adjacent to where we're going? And then how do we move to that one over there? And I think one of the things that's a misnomer out there is that people believe that people are adverse to change, Brad, but it's not really true. People are adverse to change that they don't understand or that they themselves did not help implement. If you took your team and you just said, look, this market is not really working out for us. We have a culture of learning. I want everybody to take the next 3 months and kind of figure out if we were going to pivot this company, where would we go? The ideas would flow in. Now we've got the culture of learning, culture of responsibility, culture of accountability. And you've got a collective that's determining we owned this, but now we want to compete for some of these things over here and make that pivot.
Ton of takeaways there, right? I think when we think about developing that culture of accountability, responsibility, and learning, we talk about having the right company culture in place. I think there's a ton of actionable takeaways from this conversation right here that a lot of staffing and recruiting firms can learn from to exponentially grow their organizations in the next 3 to 6 months. Patrick, before I let you go, I got to ask you this. Anything else on your mind lately that you want to share with us?
I am more hopeful for the future now with tools and the things that are coming in to the market. I really am. I'm always more hopeful about the future than probably the average individual. But I believe that no matter what age we are, no matter what or how old the company is, no matter how mature a particular market is, I always think that there's a way to take advantage of it and run with it. For those who are competing in California or New Jersey or Illinois or some of those ones where they feel a little bit more oppressed by some of the legislation that's coming down in those particular states, there are companies out there that have figured out how to compete in those particular states. And instead of exiting those states, they're actually buying staffing companies that are in those states. So I really do believe economic upturn, downturn, whoever the president is, whatever is happening, globally, there is always going to be an opportunity to be had. And if you are truly a learner, if you are studying your industry, if you are studying the markets and what's going on within it, you and your team will absolutely be able to find that opportunity to compete and take advantage even in a down cycle. And then the great thing about that is when you start to see the up cycle, you're already positioned weeks, months, years ahead of any of your other competitors.
Patrick Morin, partner with Transact Capital Partners. Patrick, before I let you go, I want to give you the floor to share a little bit about the organization.
Sure. Thank you so much. We are an investment bank based out of Richmond, Virginia. We have got presences up in New York, and we also have presence out in Denver and Colorado. We predominantly serve the staffing industry. We do mergers and acquisitions, everything from RPO, PEO, perm, temp, and even HCM, tech-enabled software. So it's we are really a deep part of this of this industry. We are passionate about it, and we've got coverage teams in the back, really, really smart guys that understand the industry and help people with their best exits.
And if you got a couple minutes, would love to run you through the rapid fire round.
Sure. I've got a couple of minutes for this.
All right.
I feel like I'm on wait, don't tell me.
Yeah, right. One more. One book that has fundamentally changed your life.
Oh, Brad, that's so hard, right? All right, I'm gonna change the question. And say, since it's a culture of learning, I'm gonna give you 3. If that's okay with you. All right.
That'll help me build my library. Absolutely.
There you go. And I might even send you a copy of each.
All right.
First one is How to Work a Room by Susan Rowan. This book I first read in 1991, I believe it was. And it changed the way that I interfaced when I went and met people or when I was going to dinner. And it is successfully managing the mingling and conversational style of being able to talk to almost anyone. It had a profound influence on my life. I've actually given a copy of one to each of my sons. And especially for sometimes for people who are not that comfortable in bigger groups, etc. Wonderful book that will expand your network, but most importantly, expand the people who influence you. Second one, 12-Week Year. I became a devotee of this book in the early 2000s. It's by Morin and Michael Lennington. One of my favorite books. It is about how to compress a year down into 12 weeks and get as much done in 12 weeks as most people do in a year. It's a profound look at not only organization, but execution. And it's just a fantastic book. Third one I would give you, it's going to surprise you. All right. It's an older book. It's by Michael Lewis. It's called Moneyball. And Moneyball, yeah, they made a movie about it, but the book is something else. It's not about money, and it's not about baseball. Yes, that's the topics, and yes, that's the subject. But if you're really thinking about that book, it is about the metrics of a business and how you can upend the way that you look at your own business from a metric perspective, and then put it side by side with the industry as a whole and say, if we change these things over here, if we change the way that we measure things against the industry, will that make us even more competitive? And it was a profound thing. We have turned around multiple companies based on the concept of Moneyball and measuring what matters.
Friends, 3 fantastic books. And as you know, as much as we're trying to give you insights and valuable books that you should be adding to your library, really, I'm just trying to build my own over here. So I appreciate the 3 recommendations there, Patrick. And of course, before I let you go, one piece of advice that you would give to somebody just starting in the staffing and recruiting industry.
So it's funny. My son actually started a staffing firm out of his dorm room at Georgetown. And and he operates it, and he's been very successful. He asked me the same question, right?
Perfect.
And he did. And I will tell you what, after a year of him doing it, what he came back to. He said, Dad, he goes, the tools are incredibly important because they leverage time. He said, but it is about the relationships that I am building with both my clients and with my customers. All right. Meaning the people he's placing and then also the customers into which he said, if I had one skill that would make all the difference, he goes, it's the ability to empathize, to sympathize, to be able to communicate with people. And that's the advice I'd give to somebody who's coming into the industry. And that is your ability to connect with another person is probably going to be the hallmark of your success going.
Patrick, had a great time, my friend. I want to thank you for coming on this episode of Take the Stage and sharing your insights with us, buddy.
You bet. Thank you so much for having me. I was really looking forward to it, and it was as much fun as I anticipated.
Hopefully we'll see you at a conference soon, my friend.
Please do.